Welcome to Bedtime Lessons. I am Arthur Vance, and tonight we embark on a journey that winds through the ancient avenues of time to explore how a people often remembered only for their raids quietly reshaped the very fabric of medieval Europe. You see, the Vikings, those famed seafarers and warriors, were also astute traders, navigators, and settlers, whose influence stretches far beyond the popular imaginings of axe-wielding raiders. They were, in essence, the economic architects, the silent cartographers of a vast and interconnected world, long before such globalism was truly understood. You might be accustomed to hearing tales of their fearsome longships striking fear into coastal communities, but tonight we shall delve deeper into the subtle yet profound ways they contributed to the grand tapestry of European civilization. Think of it this way: history often highlights the dramatic, the battle-scarred chronicles of conquest, yet beneath these loud narratives there are quieter stories of exchange, of innovation, of cultural currents flowing and merging, forever altering the landscape. It is in these gentle eddies of change that we will find the true, enduring legacy of the Vikings. They didn't just plunder, they connected. They didn't just fight, they traded. And in doing so, they wove new threads into the economic and cultural cloth of a continent on the cusp of profound transformation. We will soon consider their magnificent vessels, their ships and shores that carried them across vast, uncharted waters, opening new worlds of possibility and commerce. Of ships and shores, our earlier thoughts drifted toward a Europe perhaps too readily imagined as static. A tapestry woven with predictable threads settled in quiet anticipation. But even then, beneath the calm surface, winds of change were stirring, originating from the northern reaches, carried by an unexpected sort of mariner. Indeed, the venerable scholars of history once spoke often of the Vikings as mere raiders, sudden bursts of violence etching their mark upon unsuspecting shores. Pictures of fearsome warriors, longships appearing from the mists to pillage monasteries, filled the narratives, and while those dramatic tales hold a certain truth, they only capture a fragment of the much grander, more nuanced story, you see. For what becomes clear as we gently turn the pages of history is that these Norsemen were at their heart profound connectors. They didn't merely take, they integrated, they traded, and in doing so they quietly yet profoundly reshaped the very economic and cultural landscape of a burgeoning medieval Europe. Think of them not just as stormbringers, but as vital arteries, pumping life and silver and spices and silk into a continent that was, perhaps, more isolated than we often acknowledge. Their genius lay partly in their incredible seafaring abilities. These weren't just any boats. The Viking longships, with their shallow drafts and sturdy clinker-built construction, were marvels of engineering. They allowed passage not only across the tumultuous open seas, but deep into the very heart of the continent, up winding rivers that lesser vessels dared not attempt. It was this dual capacity, for both ocean voyages and inland navigation, that truly set them apart, transforming rivers into highways of commerce. So as these northern winds began to awaken, they carried more than just the spray of the ocean. They carried an impulse, a profound drive, to connect, to exchange, to discover. And with it, the quiet currents of trade began to flow, setting the stage for a continent interwoven by routes far more intricate than simple roads. It was the birth of an expansive network, one that would stretch far beyond the initial raids, into an empire of commerce that quietly, yet completely, changed the face of Europe. Northern winds awaken. Now it's quite easy for us to envision these Norsemen, these Northmen, as fierce warriors, perhaps even plunderers, given some of the more dramatic tales that have come down to us. Yet to see them only through that narrow lens would be to miss a significant, indeed, a foundational truth. For the Vikings were, in essence, pioneering traders, architects of vast mercantile networks that stretched across the known world, from the icy north to the sun-drenched markets of the east. Imagine, if you will, the bustling scene of a Viking trading post. It wouldn't have been unlike a distant hub of commerce today, albeit with very different goods and perhaps a more immediate sense of adventure. Their impressive ships, not merely the sleek, swift longships for raiding, but also the broader, deeper nars designed for cargo, were instrumental in this grand endeavor. These vessels, masters of both the open sea and shallow river systems, carried a trove of goods that tell a tale of ingenuity and enterprise. From the north they exported precious furs, amber gleaned from Baltic shores, sturdy ironwork, and valuable walrus ivory. These were the riches of their homeland. In return, they imported exotic luxuries that were scarce or unknown in Scandinavia, shimmering silks from Byzantium and beyond, fragrant spices from distant lands, fine wines, and perhaps most importantly, vast quantities of silver. This silver, often in the form of Arab dirhams, didn't just enrich them, it transformed their economy, moving away from simple barter toward a more sophisticated mercantile system based on weight and standard measures. It's fascinating, really, how a single commodity can reshape, quite profoundly, an entire economic landscape. These trade routes were not haphazard journeys. Oh no, they were well-established arteries of commerce, meticulously navigated. We can discern four primary directions of their ambition. The eastern route, for instance, saw them traversing the great rivers of Europe, like the Dnieper and the Volga, ultimately connecting Scandinavia with the Byzantine Empire and the wealthy Islamic caliphates. This was the famous route from the Varangians to the Greeks, a lifeline that brought forth not only goods but also ideas and cultural exchanges. Then there were the western routes pushing out into the vast, often tempestuous North Atlantic. These took them to the British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, and even, as we now know, across the ocean to the shores of North America. They traded in unexpected items there, too, such as polar bear furs and the prized ivory of narwhals. And closer to home, the Baltic Sea routes facilitated trade with the Slavic and Finnic tribes, while further south, the North Sea pathways linked Scandinavia with the bustling markets of Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish realms. Indeed, these were the arteries of a burgeoning global economy, long before the term global had any true meaning. Through these varied journeys, they wove a tapestry of trade, one that quietly, yet completely, changed the face of medieval Europe. Farmland to Fjord. Indeed, the very heart of this quiet revolution lay in the intricate web of trade routes, pathways etched across seas and rivers, that connected the disparate corners of the medieval world. The Vikings, you see, were not merely raiders, they were astute merchants, pioneering a global economy that stretched far beyond the northern winds that first carried them. Imagine, if you will, a vast tapestry of waterways. To the east, the Baltic Sea routes beckoned, a domain largely shaped by the Swedish Vikings. These intrepid sailors navigated through the Gulf of Finland, across the winding Neva River, and into the broad expanse of Lake Ladoga. From there, their journeys extended even further, connecting Scandinavia with the vast lands of Eastern Europe and with tireless perseverance, reaching the very edges of the Byzantine Empire. These watery highways allowed them to trade with Slavic tribes, and crucially, to tap into the rich veins of Islamic silver, a commodity that would reshape the economic landscape of the North. Key settlements emerged along these routes, nascent towns that hummed with the energy of commerce. Birka, nestled in what is now Sweden, became a pivotal nexus on the Baltic. Further east, in present-day Poland, Trousseau rose as another significant port, and deep within Russia, Stara Ladoga marked a vital waypoint, each a testament to the Vikings' ambition and their vision for a connected world. Then there were the North Sea connections. These were primarily the domain of the Danish and Norwegian Vikings. Routes that embraced the abundant fishing grounds and forged links between Scandinavia, the British Isles, and the burgeoning territories of Western Europe. Think of places like Hedeby, a vibrant trading town in what is now Germany, or Koppang, one of Norway's earliest urban settlements, both bustling hubs where goods flowed in and out with the rhythm of the tides. From their northern homelands, they exported highly prized furs, radiant amber, and the majestic walrus tusks, often in exchange for exotic luxuries, glistening silver, delicate silks, and aromatic spices from distant lands. It was a commerce that enriched both sides of the exchange, binding communities together in ways once unimagined. Silver and silk. Imagine, if you will, the early medieval world, a tapestry woven with many threads, but perhaps none so dynamic as those spun by the Norse. We've spoken of their transition from fierce raiders to shrewd traders, and it is in this shift that we truly begin to see Europe change. What's interesting is how quickly they began to connect disparate regions, long before others even conceived of such distances. You see, the Vikings, though often remembered for their dragon-proud longships cutting through icy waves on raids, were equally adept, if not more so, at navigating vast trade routes. They became, in essence, the economic intermediaries of medieval Europe, bridging gaps between distant cultures. Consider the Baltic Sea. Here, Swedish Vikings, sometimes called the Rus, dominated the maritime routes. They connected Scandinavia with Eastern Europe and, fascinatingly, with the Byzantine Empire. These weren't simple exchanges. They were intricate networks that facilitated the movement of goods, ideas, and even technologies. Through the Finnish Gulf, up the Neva River, and into Lake Ladoga, these routes allowed them to trade with Slavic tribes, accessing a bounty of furs, honey, and wax. But perhaps most significantly, these eastern paths led them to the shimmering silver of the Islamic world, the Dirhams, which would become a crucial currency across the north. Important ports like Birka in Sweden, Trousseau in modern-day Poland, and Stara Ladoga in Russia bloomed from these mercantile endeavors. They were more than just harbors, they were vibrant cultural melting pots where goods exchanged hands and cultures subtly blended. Then there were the connections across the North Sea. These routes, primarily championed by Danish and Norwegian Vikings, linked Scandinavia with the British Isles and Western Europe. Think of the abundant fishing grounds, the rich wool produced in Britain, and the burgeoning markets of Anglo-Saxon England and Frankish territories. From Scandinavia, furs, amber, and walrus ivory were exported luxury items indeed. In return, they imported sophisticated goods, the aforementioned silver, fine silks from Byzantium, and precious spices like cinnamon and pepper. Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway became pivotal centers in this Western network. These places served as strategic hubs, fostering not only trade but also significant cultural cross-pollination. It's a subtle yet profound shift, isn't it? From sporadic plundering to established, intricate trade networks, the Vikings laid down silent roads across the seas and rivers, inviting others to join them on courses that would reshape the very fabric of medieval European society, not with the clang of swords but with the quiet rustle of commerce. The silent road. Indeed, silver, as we discussed, was incredibly important, but how did it travel from distant lands all the way to a Viking longhouse? The answer, my friends, lies in the vast, intricate tapestry of their trade routes, pathways forged not only by raiders but by shrewd merchants and daring explorers. What's particularly fascinating is how the Vikings, from their Scandinavian homelands, developed a sophisticated network of sea lanes and riverine passages that stretched across medieval Europe and even beyond. Imagine them, if you will, not merely as warriors, but as the economic intermediaries of their age, connecting worlds that few others dared to traverse. Now, these routes weren't just simple lines on a map, they were arteries of commerce, pulsating with the exchange of goods, ideas, and even languages. On the western trails, we find the Norwegians and Danes sailing across the North Sea, reaching the British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, and for a time, even the distant shores of North America, what they called Vinland. Think of the treasures they sought and carried: rich furs, amber glistening like captured sunlight, iron for tools and weapons, and those magnificent walrus tusks. Simultaneously, the Swedish Vikings, often known as the Varangians, carved out extensive routes to the east. Picture them navigating the winding waterways of Eastern Europe, rivers like the mighty Volga and the Dnieper, carrying them deep into the heart of the continent. These eastern connections brought them into contact with the glorious Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, and even the powerful Islamic caliphates further south, perhaps reaching as far as Baghdad. This is where exotic luxuries like fine silks, fragrant spices, and the coveted silver dirhams, the very coins we just spoke of, flowed back towards Scandinavia. These journeys, both west and east, weren't without peril, of course. The vastness of the North Atlantic presented its own challenges, with its unpredictable weather and treacherous currents. And on the rivers to the east, traders had to contend with rapids, hostile tribes, and, sadly, the constant threat of piracy, even from other Viking groups. Yet they persisted, driven by the promise of wealth and the sheer thrill of discovery. It's this persistent spirit of exploration and enterprise that slowly but surely transformed isolated settlements into bustling trade centers, hidden harbors that would emerge as vital commercial hubs across the medieval world. Hidden harbors emerged. The silent roads, then, were but a prelude to something far grander, the intricate dance of the Viking trade routes themselves. You see, while we often picture the Vikings as fearsome warriors, they were perhaps even more profoundly masterful navigators and astute merchants. Their longships, those marvels of early naval engineering, were not only vessels of war, but also the very lifeblood of a burgeoning medieval economy. These ships, particularly the broader, deeper Nari vessels, could carry vast amounts of cargo, up to 24 tons, mind you, crisscrossing seas and penetrating deep into continents via winding river systems. Their shallow drafts allowed them to navigate both the tumultuous open waters of the North Sea and the quieter, meandering rivers of Eastern Europe, creating a network of exchange that stretched for thousands of miles. Now imagine, if you will, the scope of these routes. To the west, their vessels braved the North Atlantic, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and even the shores of North America, centuries before Columbus. Here they traded in luxury goods unique to the far north, the ivory tusks of walruses, the rich furs of Arctic animals, and perhaps even the occasional falcon, highly prized in courts across Europe. To the east, the picture becomes even more complex, like a finely woven tapestry. Scandinavian merchants, often journeying down the great rivers like the Volga and the Dnieper, connected the Baltic Sea to the Black and Caspian Seas. This wasn't merely local trade. It was a conduit to the distant Byzantine Empire and the thriving Islamic caliphates, places of unimaginable wealth and sophistication. From these distant lands, they would bring back precious silks from China, aromatic spices from the east, and crucially, an immense influx of silver dirhams from the Islamic world. Coins that would become a standard currency throughout much of northern Europe. What's particularly fascinating is how these Vikings integrated themselves into existing economic structures. They weren't just creating new paths, they were weaving themselves into older, established trade relationships. They brought with them goods such as timber, iron, and a darker commodity, I'm afraid, enslaved people, often captured during their raids or acquired from Slavic tribes. In return, they imported wines, intricate textiles, and fine glassware. The sheer volume of this trade led to the establishment of bustling urban centers. Places like Hedeby in Denmark, Birka in Sweden, and Koppang in Norway became vibrant melting pots of cultures and commodities. These were not mere villages but thriving market towns, drawing merchants and artisans from across the known world. Think of Dublin, for instance. Initially a Viking stronghold, it swiftly transformed into a pivotal hub for the slave trade, connecting Ireland to wider European networks. York in England became another such nexus, deeply influenced by Norse culture and commerce. This extensive network wasn't just about moving goods, it was about the profound transfer of ideas, technologies, and cultures, slowly, yet undeniably, reshaping the very fabric of medieval Europe. Goods across seas. Pamatesi panstvo jak rozmoilizmio tichakritich zadekskech, Kator wikingai zeminiali w dynamics ni porti. Timieska, stali si nixim nudzielni Wesley, laxes zi sobakoras weak sasyk. Zinish wikingai zinizerklad wagai sikawasia, wiresik milina shlaki, Kator ziminili oblix execute rednox Europi, Wyabrezi sobi, Wielka, misterni tikana pajksen. W. Centrum Scandinavia, Anisai Rasi Gajasai Deliko Pozajej Skandinoski Brzegi, as Po Atlantic, Baltic, W. Zidilas Potsnich Arzek W. Skadu, a not, perchance, Dodikajek Bliskiego W. Skadu. Tanai Bailey Zalidwi PR Zipit Kaupadras, Bailey to Precisijni PR Zemislane Tracy Handlo, Kator Nazos Polixili Rosni Kulturi, Inarity, Na Palniknim W. Skadzi Europi, Dunksisi Inorigo Dominowali Na Morzupalniknim. Solidny staki plywli midzi Skandinavia wispami brightigskimi, a stampta du Europi zakitnie. Jakar zeki Kator zasalajasai nauzijum, Timorski drogi laxili elsnias fjordi norija zi tetniasimi zisum myastami anglisaskie angliai izimiami frankeskimi. Jadizi na ladzi toxili si walki, na morzu spotically si handle. Futrazi palniknich lasso, bursten zi wibazezi baltiku, nizwikal sen klai morso. W. Shaisko to Wedralona Tidelki Rinki. W. Zamian na Palnak dosierli PR Zedmiati, Kator Swaixilio Bagek to Awarfin Wenu Esben Monti, Jedwibi Z Odelglitch Strawn, Exitix ni PR Ziproi Taki Jack Sineman, Peepas I Shafran, or as Slashit ni T Canoni I Camiani. Hedebi W. Dani I Koppang W. Norija Stali, Sai Zaiwami Swidik Twami Tigo Handlu, Mies Kami, Jadizi Razbaz Mieli Razni Jezeki I Jadizi Splotali, Sai Razmate Kulturi. Jednak na W. Skadzi Historia Dalkosisnich Shlako Handloich Nabierala Shegalni Fasinudsic Barwa. Tam na Morzu Baltikim Prim Weedli Shwedsi Wikingawi. Ik droga du Europe W. Skadnie I Jesli Pazwola Panstvo as du Samigo Cesarsto Byzantijskiego Bilo. Polixeni Zatoki Finskie Arzeki Nui Pitsnigo Jezra Ladoga. To Nixim Laborant Wadnich Sizek Katori Proudzil du Nuri Godnich Bogektwa. T. Shlaki Umazliwili Handel Z. Plemionami Sloyanskimi. Koat Wierlo Dostep du Nizrikal Senigo, Esrebra, Z Odolgulgo Swiata Islamskiego. Burka W. Shwekji, Truso W. Paul Stara Ladoga W. Dizasiasaj Rosji Bailey Nixim Latarni Morski Tigo Handlu. Tatam Spotically Si W. Skadzi Zakodum, Adobraidi Planli Struminiami, Kaish Taltajek Zupelnino Spalksinstva, No ITW Skadni Ropski Shlaki Wadni. Wykorzistuali oni rozlegal systemi arzexni, taki jak walga, Dnieper idan, by dadazek du morza zarnigo I morza kaspeskiego. To jest taslina droga od wergo du greco, legendarna opwias o kupkech I wajanikech, wzdilas tich arzek paustana poznie plakoki handlo I osedi, kator z sizasum piarzik zinia, si du naradzin. Pansto rusi kijowskie, widza panstvo tanai baili tilko shlaki handlo. To Bailey artery Katormi Plain la Crew Histora Laxek Kr Ubig College Europe, Idealage Posa Jej Granis. A common tongue. The rhythm of wind and wave, the scent of timber and brine, these are the whispers of Viking trade, a tapestry woven not by conquest alone but by a quiet, persistent quest for commerce. Indeed, these intrepid seafarers with their sophisticated vessels revolutionized economic interactions across medieval Europe. Think of it not as a series of sudden, violent acts, but as the slow, deliberate work of connecting distant shores. At the heart of this vast commercial web were the distinctive Scandinavian trade networks. You see, they didn't just plunder, they built a system of exchange that linked diverse regions and cultures, facilitating a flow of goods, ideas, and even technologies that reshaped the cultural landscape of medieval Europe. It was a quieter revolution, perhaps, than the clang of battle, but no less profound. Consider, if you will, the Baltic Sea routes, primarily the domain of the Swedish Vikings. These routes were arteries connecting Scandinavia with Eastern Europe and indeed the distant Byzantine Empire, winding through the Gulf of Finland, along the Neva River and into Lake Ladoga. This intricate dance of waterways allowed them to trade with Slavic tribes and gain access to the coveted silver from the Islamic world. Places like Birka in Sweden, Truso in what is now Poland, and Stara Ladoga in Russia. These were not just stops on a map, but crucial hubs where cultures mingled and goods exchanged hands. Further west, the North Sea pathways. These were largely the domain of Danish and Norwegian Vikings. They connected Scandinavia with the British Isles and Western Europe, leveraging the rich fishing grounds of the North Atlantic. This was a direct line for trade with Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish territories, creating a bustling thoroughfare for commerce. Important trade centers emerged here too, such as Hedeby in Denmark and Kopping in Norway. Now, what exactly flowed along these liquid roads? Imagine a diverse cargo. From the Norse lands came furs from the deep northern forests, the lustrous amber from the Baltic coast, sturdy iron ore from Swedish mines, and mighty timbers for building. And let us not forget the incredibly valuable walrus tusks, a prized commodity for their ivory. In return, a treasure trove of luxury items flowed back, shimmering silver dirhams from Islamic lands, which became a vital currency, exotic silks from the Byzantine and even Chinese empires, and fragrant spices like cinnamon, pepper, and saffron, along with fine textiles and precious gemstones. It was a world waking up to the allure of distant riches. What this means is that while the image of the Viking often conjures up a warrior, a significant and perhaps more enduring legacy lies in their role as intrepid merchants. Beyond the battles. Indeed, much like a well-worn ledger, the sagas and archaeological discoveries also reveal a far less dramatic, though no less significant aspect of their journeys: trade. You see, the Vikings were not simply raiders, they were astute merchants, connecting distant lands and weaving a vast economic tapestry across medieval Europe. They revolutionized economic interaction, creating long-distance sea and river routes that fostered an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and even technologies. Imagine, if you will, the Baltic Sea, a highway dominated by Swedish Vikings. This was their thoroughfare, linking their Scandinavian homelands with Eastern Europe and even the mighty Byzantine Empire. Through waterways like the Gulf of Finland and the Neva River, they reached Lake Ladoga, trading with Slavic tribes and gaining access to the coveted silver of the Islamic world. Crucial ports like Birka in Sweden, Truso in modern-day Poland, and Stara Ladoga in Russia flourished as bustling centers of commerce. Now, shifting our gaze westward, the North Sea routes. These were largely navigated by Danish and Norwegian Vikings, forging connections between Scandinavia, the British Isles, and Western Europe. Think of the abundant fishing grounds that sustained their voyages and facilitated trade with Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish territories. Havens like Hedeby in Denmark and Kopping in Norway became vital trading hubs, bustling with activity. It was a complex dance of export and import, furs, amber, and walrus ivory flowing out from the north, while luxury items like silver, silks, and exotic spices flowed in. These journeys, often perilous, were driven by a quiet ambition: to bring the world's treasures home. It created a constant flow, a circulatory system for the medieval world, if you will, that pushed societies forward. New ways whisper. Beyond the din of battlefields and the forging of new settlements, the Vikings were also master architects of commerce. They wove a vast, intricate tapestry of trade routes, stitching together disparate corners of the known world, from the frozen North Sea to the sun-drenched shores of the Byzantine Empire and the bustling markets of the Islamic caliphates. Think of it, if you will, as a complex circulatory system, pumping goods, ideas, and even technologies across medieval Europe and beyond. What's truly remarkable is how these Scandinavian merchants, often through sheer audacity and unparalleled navigational skill, revolutionized economic interactions. They were not merely raiders, you see, but pioneers, laying down arteries of exchange that would shape the continent for centuries to come. Now these sprawling networks naturally found their focal points. Across the Baltic Sea, for instance, Swedish Vikings carved out routes that connected Scandinavia with Eastern Europe and even the distant Byzantine Empire. Imagine longships laden with furs and amber gliding through the Finnish Gulf, along the Neva River, and into the tranquil waters of Lake Ladoga. These paths allowed them to trade with the Slavic tribes, gaining access to a coveted commodity, Islamic silver, which flowed abundantly from the east. Key to these eastern ventures were vibrant port towns like Birka in Sweden, Trousseau in what is now Poland, and Stara Ladoga, nestled deep within modern-day Russia. Simultaneously, over the churning waters of the North Sea, Danish and Norwegian Vikings established their own domain. These western routes linked Scandinavia directly with the British Isles and the burgeoning territories of Western Europe. Here, abundant fishing grounds provided sustenance, while trade boomed with Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish realms. Ports such as Hedeby in what is now Germany and Kopping in Norway became crucial hubs. Through these vigorous exchanges, Nordic goods, luxurious furs, gleaming amber, and the majestic walrus tusks found their way south, while the Vikings returned northward with precious imports, fine silver, shimmering silks, and exotic spices. It was a remarkable ballet of supply and demand, performed across the high seas. Coin of the realm. Now the North Sea pathways. These were primarily traversed by the Danish and Norwegian Norsemen. Imagine, if you will, the vast stretch of water connecting Scandinavia to the British Isles and the Frankish lands. This was a busy, bustling highway rich with abundant fishing grounds, which naturally fostered trade with Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish territories. Important hubs like Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway emerged as vibrant commercial centers. Through these routes, Nordic goods, perhaps fine furs, gleaming amber, or the majestic walrus tusks, would travel outwards, while luxury items like silver, shimmering silks, and fragrant spices found their way back to the north. Then we turn our gaze eastward, to the sprawling river systems of Eastern Europe. The Volga, the Dnieper, the Don, these great arteries allowed the longships to penetrate deep into the continent, eventually reaching the Black and Caspian Seas. This was the fabled route from the Varangians to the Greeks, a journey that not only facilitated trade with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate, but also led to the establishment of settlements and trading posts along the rivers. Indeed, this very movement laid the foundations for what would become the Kievan Rus state, a fascinating mingling of cultures and ambitions. Throughout these extensive networks, certain goods became particularly prized. Among the luxury items, we find silk, perhaps from distant China or the Byzantine Empire, and silver dirhams from the Islamic lands, which became a significant currency throughout the Norse world. Imagine the allure of spices like cinnamon, pepper, and saffron, or the beauty of precious fabrics and glistening gemstones. But the trade was not solely in luxuries. Raw materials were equally vital: furs harvested from the northern forests, amber gathered from the Baltic shores, iron ore from the rich Swedish earth, and timber from Scandinavia itself. And alas, it must be whispered, the trade in human beings, captives taken in raids, was also a sorrowful yet significant part of this vast economic tapestry. These unfortunate souls were often sold in the bustling markets of the Islamic world, with places like Dublin gaining a somber notoriety as a major slave market. These extensive routes naturally led to the rise of prominent trading centers, often referred to as emporia. Hedeby, nestled in what is now Germany, served as a crucial link between Scandinavia and continental Europe. It was a diverse place, protected by great walls where many tongues could be heard. Birka in Sweden was another vital node on the Baltic trade route, known for its extensive cemetery with over 3,000 graves. Testament to its long history, Koppang in Norway stands as one of the earliest urban settlements in that land, a place where craftsmanship flourished and distant trade was evidenced by finds of Islamic coins and the golden glow of amber. And then there was Kiev in what is now Ukraine, the future capital of Kievan Rus, a pivotal stop on that route from the Varangians to the Greeks, where Scandinavian, Slavic, and Byzantine influences flowed together. It is a nuanced picture, you see, of commerce, culture, and transformation. Paths less traveled. From the glint of a silver coin, we now turn our gaze to the vast networks that transported such treasures across an awakening medieval world. You see, the Vikings, those formidable figures we often associate with longships and raids, were also remarkable merchants, weaving a tapestry of trade routes that stretched far beyond the familiar shores of Scandinavia. Imagine, if you will, the early medieval landscape, a patchwork of scattered settlements, often isolated, with little easy access to goods from distant lands. The Vikings changed this, not always with a sword, but often with a sail. They were the pioneers of long-distance economic interaction, revolutionizing how northern Europe connected with its neighbors. These ancient mariners established extensive sea and river routes, connecting disparate regions and cultures across what might seem an impossible distance. There were the Baltic sea routes, for instance, largely navigated by Swedish Vikings. These connected Scandinavia to Eastern Europe, and even, through winding river systems, to the Byzantine Empire. Think of it furs and amber moving eastward, while precious Islamic silver dirhams, and perhaps even silks from far-off China, flowed in the opposite direction. Places like Burka in Sweden, Trousseau in what is now Poland, and Staria Ladoga in modern Russia blossomed into bustling hubs where varied peoples met and exchanged their wares. Then there were the North Sea connections, mainly the domain of Danish and Norwegian Vikings. These routes linked Scandinavia with the British Isles and Western Europe. Along these paths, the rich fisheries of the North Sea provided sustenance, and trade flourished with Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish territories. Nordic goods like exotic furs, glistening amber, and the mighty walrus tusks were exported, while luxury items such as fine silver, shimmering silk, and aromatic spices were brought back. These weren't merely exchanges of goods, they were conduits for ideas, technologies, and even spiritual beliefs to travel and intermingle. But the true marvel, perhaps, lay in the extensive East European waterways. The Vikings, or rather the Varangians as they were known in the East, mastered the vast river systems of the Volga, the Dnieper, and the Don. These watery highways allowed them to reach the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, following a path often called the route from the Varangians to the Greeks. Along these critical arteries, trading posts and settlements were established, fostering burgeoning commerce with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate, and in time, even laying the very foundations for the state of Kievan Rus. It was a world-spanning enterprise forged by courage, ingenuity, and a keen eye for opportunity, a network of quiet threads connecting vast civilizations. The Eastern Echo. The sagas tell us of journeys across vast, churning waters, voyages driven not just by the allure of conquest, but also by the quiet, persistent whisper of trade. For the Norsemen, these paths were often less traveled, leading them into the very heart of the continent's sprawling river systems. Imagine, if you will, venturing deep into the eastern lands, far from the familiar salt spray of the northern seas. What truly transformed these intrepid sailors into the economic architects of northern Europe were their intricate networks of long-distance trade routes. These were more than just lines on a map, they were lifelines, connecting diverse cultures and profoundly influencing the cultural landscape of medieval Europe through a rich exchange of goods, ideas, and even technologies. It was a subtle revolution, unfolding quietly across the vastness of rivers and oceans. Now, the Baltic maritime routes, these were largely dominated by the Swedish Vikings. They wove a complex tapestry, linking Scandinavia with Eastern Europe and even the distant Byzantine Empire. Think of it as a grand, flowing ribbon, moving from the Gulf of Finland, along the Neva River and into Lake Ladoga. This allowed them to trade with the Slavic tribes dwelling along the water's edge and crucially gain access to the shimmering silver of the Islamic world. Important hubs like Burka in Sweden, Trousseau in what is now Poland, and Staria Ladoga in modern-day Russia blossomed along these aquatic pathways. Simultaneously, the North Sea connections, primarily navigated by Danish and Norwegian Vikings, tethered Scandinavia to the British Isles and Western Europe. These were routes rich with possibility, often exploiting abundant fishing grounds and facilitating bustling trade with Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish territories. Essential trading centers such as Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway became vibrant meeting points. What flowed through these arteries? Nordic goods like plush furs, shimmering amber, and the majestic tusks of walruses moving westward, while luxurious imports, precious silver, exotic silks, and aromatic spices made their way back north. It was a constant, rhythmic exchange, shaping the very currents of commerce. Riverside settlements bloom. From these far-flung expeditions, a new kind of interaction blossomed, one built not just on raids, but on the silent, steady pulse of commerce. The Vikings, you see, were not merely warriors, they were astute traders, and their ships, those marvels of engineering, became the arteries of a vast, interconnected economic network that profoundly reshaped medieval Europe. Imagine, if you will, the Baltic Sea, a bustling thoroughfare for the Swedish Vikings. They ventured eastward, much like the echoes of our previous discussion, connecting Scandinavia to the Eastern European lands and even extending to the Byzantine Empire. Important ports were established, Burka in Sweden, Trousseau in what is now Poland, and Stara Ladoga in Russia. These were not just stops, they were vibrant hubs where goods, ideas, and even technologies converged. It was along these routes that the shimmering Islamic silver dirhams, which would become a dominant currency in the north, flowed into Scandinavia. What a journey these coins must have had from distant Baghdad to the heart of Viking lands, each one whispering tales of far-off markets. Now turning our gaze westward, the North Sea became the domain of Danish and Norwegian Vikings. Their longships, those iconic vessels, navigated these often turbulent waters, reaching the British Isles and Western Europe. Here you find pivotal trading centers such as Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway. These centers facilitated a thriving exchange: furs from the northern forests, amber from the Baltic shores, even walrus ivory flowing out of Scandinavia. In return, luxuries previously unknown in the distant north, fine silks, exotic spices, and intricate jewelry, made their way back, enriching the lives of those who could afford them. It was a complex dance of supply and demand played out across vast distances. What truly enabled this vast enterprise was their mastery of maritime technology. Their shipbuilding was revolutionary. The clinker construction, where planks overlapped, created hulls that were both strong and flexible, and the introduction of a keel provided stability, transforming their boats into true ocean-going vessels. Perhaps even more remarkable was their navigational prowess. They knew the currents, understood the winds, and observed the flight patterns of birds. Some histories even suggest they used sunstones, natural crystals sensitive to polarized light, to navigate on cloudy days. Imagine journeying across the open ocean, guided by nothing more than the sun and these mysterious stones. This ingenuity allowed them to establish regular, predictable routes, transforming sporadic raids into sustainable trade. They were, in essence, the trailblazers of superhighways on the sea. This intertwining of trade and exploration, of course, had deep and lasting consequences, quietly reshaping the social landscape of the entire continent. A subtle exchange. Riverside settlements had bloomed, yes, but it was the vast, often unseen networks of trade that truly nurtured the Viking Age. They were not merely warriors, you see, but supremely adept merchants, connecting disparate worlds with their ships and ingenuity. Imagine, if you will, the humble beginnings of their trade, driven by what was scarce in their homelands, perhaps a certain type of iron or the warmth of fine textiles. This simple desire grew, slowly but surely, into an intricate tapestry of maritime and riverine routes stretching across continents. Indeed, these Viking trade routes from the late 8th to the early 11th century were vital arteries. They were paths not just for goods, but for the very pulse of cultures and ideas across Europe, Asia, and the vast North Atlantic. Consider their unique longships, shallow-drafted vessels capable of navigating both the tempestuous open seas and the winding, narrow rivers deep into the continental interiors. This unparalleled versatility was, perhaps, their greatest technological marvel, a true testament to their mastery of the waves. Now these routes branched out, much like the mighty rivers themselves. There were the eastward paths, connecting Scandinavia with the glittering Byzantine Empire and the sophisticated Islamic caliphates. Down the great rivers like the Volga and the Dnieper, Viking traders, often known as the Rus, ventured into the distant lands of the Middle East, seeking silver and luxurious silks. Then to the west, routes ventured across the North Atlantic, to the icy shores of Iceland and Greenland, and even, as some sagas whisper, to the verdant lands of North America. And closer to home, the Baltic Sea routes facilitated commerce between Scandinavia and the burgeoning settlements of what we now know as Russia, Germany, and Poland. Within Scandinavia itself, internal routes ensured that foreign treasures were distributed, and local products, the rich furs from northern forests, the gleaming amber from the Baltic coasts, the mighty walrus tusks, found their way onto these grand international highways. What's fascinating is how these traders, with their keen eyes and sharp minds, integrated themselves into existing European economic networks. They not only transported goods but also introduced new systems like standardized weights and measures, which helped lay the groundwork for a more structured medieval economy across northern Europe. It was a subtle yet profound shift, an economic revolution happening quietly beneath the surface of history. Women's quiet part. The echoes of those subtle exchanges, you see, were profound. While the initial encounters might have been fragmented, over time, a robust network began to solidify, stretching across vast distances that, for many, seemed unfathomable. Think of it like a delicate spider's web spun thread by thread until it could catch substantial nourishment. And indeed, nourishment it did catch. Now these burgeoning trade routes were not merely lines on a map, they were lifelines, arteries connecting disparate worlds. Imagine the Baltic Sea, for instance. It became a buzzing thoroughfare, particularly animated by the Swedish Vikings. They ventured eastward, much like silent rivers finding their way to the sea, connecting Scandinavia to the distant reaches of Eastern Europe and even through further conduits the Byzantine Empire. They navigated through the Gulf of Finland, along the Neva River and into Lake Ladoga, establishing crucial ports that served as cultural crossroads. Places like Birka in Sweden or Trousseau, which you might find along the modern Polish coast, and the venerable Stara Ladoga, far into what is now Russia, became vibrant hubs where cultures mingled and goods exchanged hands. This wasn't merely about exchanging furs for trinkets. It was about tapping into the rich veins of silver flowing from the Islamic world, a commodity that would fundamentally alter the economic landscape of the North. Simultaneously, the North Sea became a highway of its own, predominantly charted by Danish and Norwegian Vikings. Here, the focus was slightly different, more directed towards the abundant fishing grounds and the burgeoning markets of the British Isles and Western Europe. Centers like Hedeby, sitting strategically in what is now Germany, and Koppang in Norway, emerged as vital transit points. These were places where the North's bounty, perhaps the warm pelts of animals, the luminous amber from the Baltic shores, or the prized walrus ivory, flowed outwards. In return, a treasure trove of luxury items made its way back, the shimmer of silver, the softness of silk, and the exotic allure of spices. But the grandest, perhaps most ambitious, of these routes was the intricate network of Eastern European waterways. Utilizing the vast river systems, the Volga, the Dnieper, the Don, the Vikings pressed deep into the continent, all the way to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. This was the fabled road from the Varangians to the Greeks, a journey of immense scale. Along these winding riverine paths, trading posts and settlements blossomed into existence, facilitating commerce with the sophisticated Byzantine Empire and the powerful Islamic caliphate. What's truly remarkable about this particular venture is that it ultimately laid the foundations for a new state, the Kievan Rus, a pivotal entity in the unfolding tapestry of Eastern European history. It's a testament, you see, to how profoundly trade can reshape not just economies, but entire civilizations. The trading tide. Now, as we consider the silent threads women wove into the Viking tapestry, it would be incomplete not to speak of the grandeur they helped to build through commerce. You see, the Vikings were remarkable for many things: their ships, their sagas, their spirit of exploration. But perhaps less sung, yet equally profound, is their role as master traders. They revolutionized the very fabric of North European economics, linking cultures and regions through vast, intricate networks of trade. Think of it not as a simple marketplace, but as a grand symphony of exchange, where goods, ideas, and even technologies flowed like rivers across the continent. Baxla. Their success in many ways was born from a fundamental need. While their homeland, Scandinavia, was rich in certain resources, timber, iron, furs, and the precious amber from the Baltic shores, it lacked many others. This scarcity, rather than limiting them, spurred them to look outward, far beyond their fjords and forests, and so they sailed. With their unique longships, vessels of shallow draft that could traverse both open, stormy seas and winding, narrow rivers, they charted new courses. These ships, much like the women we spoke of, were versatile and vital, carrying timber and furs, but also, sadly, human beings captured and sold into slavery, particularly in places like Dublin, which rose to prominence as a trading hub, specializing in that grim commerce. Two great watery highways emerged from their endeavors. To the east, the Baltic Sea became a vigorous thoroughfare, dominated by the Swedish Vikings. This route linked Scandinavia with Eastern Europe and, astonishingly, reached all the way to the Byzantine Empire, via thoroughfares like the Gulf of Finland, the Neva River, and Lake Ladoga. Imagine the exotic treasures that flowed inward: silver dirhams from the Islamic world, which became a vital currency among the Norse, exquisite silks from distant China and Byzantium, and a bounty of spices, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, that lent new flavors to the northern palate. Outward, they sent valuable furs, the luminous amber, and the formidable walrus ivory. Key ports like Birka in Sweden, Trousseau in what is now Poland, and Staria Ladoga in Russia thrummed with the energy of this exchange. Then to the west lay the tempestuous North Sea routes. These were largely navigated by the Danish and Norwegian Vikings, connecting Scandinavia not only to the British Isles, but also to the Frankish territories of Western Europe. These passages facilitated trade in the abundant fish caught in those northern waters, and again, the export of Nordic furs, amber, and walrus tusks. In return, luxury items, much like those from the east, found their way northward. Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway became vibrant maritime hubs, drawing in merchants and goods from across the known world. These were not mere stops, you see, but vibrant cultural cauldrons where different peoples mingled, traded, and inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, wove new strands into the ongoing narrative of Europe. Seeds of Chang. The flow of goods and people across these pathways was not a one-way street, you see. It was a rich tapestry of exchange, where every journey brought back not just exotic silks or gleaming silver, but also new ideas, new technologies, and a gradual, almost imperceptible blending of cultures. When we consider the Viking Age, it is crucial to move beyond a simplistic view of raids and pillage, though those were certainly a part of the story, and embrace the nuanced reality of a civilization deeply rooted in commerce and connection. It's a story of transformation, where fierce warriors often became shrewd traders, laying down the very foundations of medieval European economies. And these economic foundations, well, they were built upon a fascinating network of silver. Imagine, if you will, the clamor and bustle of a thriving market, perhaps in Hedeby, where the languages of the north mingled with those of the Franks and the Anglo-Saxons. Here, the silver you might find wasn't always in neat, standardized coins. No, the Vikings were particularly practical. They prized the underlying metal itself. Islamic silver dirhams, flowing in abundance from the caliphates, became a sort of universal currency. But here's what's interesting: they weren't used just as whole coins. The Vikings would often cut these coins into smaller pieces. This hack silver, as it came to be known, was then weighed to determine its value. It was a fluid, adaptable system, allowing for precise transactions and driving the development of a weight-based economy across northern Europe. This influx of silver, this new form of currency, did more than just facilitate trade. It stimulated economic growth, fostered the rise of a merchant class, and began to shift societies away from pure barter towards a more sophisticated monetary system. What this means is, the quiet clinking of hack silver in a Viking merchant's pouch represented a fundamental change in how wealth was accumulated and managed. Now the goods that traversed these routes were as diverse as the peoples who traded them. From the cold, dense forests of the north came furs of sable and ermine, amber glistening like captured sunlight from the Baltic shores, and the precious walrus ivory, tusks that journeyed to distant lands to be carved into exquisite objects. These were traded for luxuries untold: the vibrant silks of Byzantium and China, the aromatic spices that tantalized palates, and the fine wines from warmer climes. But perhaps one of the most tragic and undeniably significant commodities in this vast exchange was human lives. Slaves, often captives from raids in the British Isles and Eastern Europe, were sold in bustling markets from Dublin to the lucrative centers of the Islamic world. It was a grim reality of the age, yet it underscores the sheer scale and complexity of the Viking trading enterprise, encompassing everything from precious metals and exotic goods to human beings themselves. This constant movement, this relentless quest for goods, meant a pervasive cultural exchange, shaping not only the economic landscape but the very fabric of identity across vast distances of medieval Europe. Gentle giants fade. The sagas, as you may know, speak of these long voyages, these extraordinary feats of seamanship. Yet they tell us only a fraction of the story of how the Vikings truly reshaped the world around them, not merely through the might of their raiding axes, but through the quiet, persistent rhythm of trade. They were, in essence, the very first architects of a truly globalized medieval economy, connecting distant lands and cultures in ways previously unimaginable. Imagine, if you will, the vast, shimmering expanse of the Baltic Sea, a crucial thoroughfare, dominated largely by the Swedish Vikings. Their sleek vessels plied these waters, establishing intricate maritime routes that stretched from the heart of Scandinavia, through the Gulf of Finland, along the Neva River, and into the tranquil embrace of Lake Ladoga. This wasn't merely about moving goods from one shore to another. No, this was about forging connections with the Slavic tribes along the eastern reaches, and perhaps most importantly, gaining access to the glittering silver from the far-off Islamic world. Towns like Birka in Sweden, Truso in what we now call Poland, and Stara Ladoga in modern-day Russia truly blossomed as vital hubs along these bustling routes. Then turn your gaze westward, across the often tempestuous waters of the North Sea. Here, the Danish and Norwegian Vikings carved out their dominion, linking Scandinavia with the British Isles and the burgeoning Frankish territories of Western Europe. These were not simply routes for plunder, though that too had its place. These were arteries of commerce, exploiting rich fishing grounds and facilitating the steady flow of goods. Picture Hedeby in Denmark, a thriving emporium, or Koppang in Norway, one of the earliest urban settlements in that rugged land. From these northern harbors, a stream of indigenous goods, the softest furs from their deep forests, the warm, golden gleam of amber from the Baltic coast, the precious iron ore from Swedish mines, solid timber, and the magnificent walrus tusks from the far north, flowed outwards. In return, a steady tide of luxury items, carefully sourced from distant lands, flowed back in: the gleaming silver, the finest silks from Byzantium, and the exotic spices like cinnamon, pepper, and saffron, to name but a few. The tapestry of trade, you see, was far more intricate than mere raids might suggest. The Norse were not just raiders, they were navigators, entrepreneurs, and perhaps most profoundly, conduits of exchange. Legacy in the Dusk. The gentle giants, as we spoke of them, certainly faded, but their impact, their legacy, continued to resonate across the vast tapestry of Europe. You see, the Vikings were not simply warriors marching from one conquest to another. They were, in their quiet way, economic architects, weaving a vast network of trade routes that fundamentally reshaped the medieval world. Now imagine, if you will, the early medieval European landscape. It was fragmented, perhaps. Local economies, localized trade. Then the Norsemen arrived. With their remarkable longships, these technological marvels of their era, they navigated not only the turbulent open seas but also the shallow, winding rivers deep into the continent. This allowed them to connect distant markets, bridging cultures and facilitating an exchange of goods, ideas, and even technologies that might otherwise have remained isolated. Consider the Baltic Sea routes, dominated primarily by the Swedish Vikings, or Varangians as they were known. These routes linked Scandinavia with Eastern Europe, extending all the way to the Byzantine Empire, via waterways like the Gulf of Finland, the Neva River, and Lake Ladoga. This wasn't merely about moving goods, it was about connecting worlds. They traded with Slavic tribes, gaining access to precious silver from the Islamic world, silver that became a crucial currency, influencing economic systems far beyond the Baltic. Important trading hubs like Birka in Sweden, Trousseau, near where Gdansk is today, and Staria Ladoga in what is now Russia. These weren't just places, they were melting pots of culture and commerce. Simultaneously, Norwegian and Danish Vikings carved out connections across the North Sea. These routes interlaced Scandinavia with the British Isles and Western Europe. Think of abundant fishing grounds, amber from the Baltic shores, and walrus ivory, all exchanged for luxurious items like finely spun silks, exotic spices, and of course, that ever-present silver. Centers like Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway became vibrant maritime marketplaces, bustling with activity. Yet what is often overlooked is how these trade routes led to the establishment of permanent outposts and settlements, places where Norse culture blended with the local, creating something new entirely. And then the Eastern European river systems themselves, rivers like the Volga, the Dnieper, and the Don. These were not just waterways, they were arteries of commerce, leading to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. This became known as the route from the Varangians to the Greeks. Along these vast riverine networks, trading posts and settlements blossomed. These were gateways to an even wider world, facilitating trade with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate, even leading, some historians believe, to the very formation of the early Kievan Rus state. It's a testament to their entrepreneurial spirit, their quiet persistence, that these journeys, these exchanges, fundamentally altered the economic and cultural landscape of a sleeping Europe, preparing it, perhaps, for its eventual awakening. Sleeping Europe awakens. Now the trade itself extended far beyond what one might initially imagine, reaching from the very edges of the known world all the way to the caliphates of Baghdad, and even across the tumultuous waves of the North Atlantic to the shores of North America. It is a vast tapestry of connections, woven not just with goods, but with ideas, technologies, and, you see, with destinies. It reshaped the medieval economy profoundly, turning these Norse traders into what you might call the economic intermediaries of their age. The rivers of Eastern Europe, like the Dnieper and the Volga, became arteries connecting Scandinavia with the vibrant hearts of Byzantium and the sophisticated Islamic caliphates. Furs gathered from the northern forests, amber glistening like captured sunlight, and tragically human beings sold into servitude. These were exchanged for exotic silks, fragrant spices, and most importantly, for silver, the very currency that fueled an era. Important trading centers arose along these routes. Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, and Koppang in Norway. These weren't merely bustling markets, they were melting pots of culture, where the steady clinking of coins mingled with a babel of tongues. What archaeological digs have revealed through a wealth of coins, jewelry, and artifacts is the sheer scale and intricacy of this economic web. This influx of silver, particularly the Islamic dirhams, was monumental. Vast hordes of these coins have been unearthed, telling a silent story of wealth accumulation. The Vikings, however, weren't always concerned with the coin's artistic face. They often valued it purely for its silver content, leading to the practice of cutting coins hack silver, which was then weighed and traded. This practical approach, born of necessity and adaptability, profoundly influenced the developing monetary economies of Northern Europe. It wasn't just goods flowing along these routes, it was a profound exchange of ideas and cultures. The Norse traders readily adopted new technologies, like the intricate process of glass bead production from the Middle East. Artistic styles blended, religious iconography evolved, and even the very seeds of Christianity found fertile ground in this rich cultural loam, paving the way for the eventual Christianization of the North. But this journey was not without its perils. Imagine, if you will, the merchant braving unknown rivers, facing hostile tribes, or, ironically, encountering raiders who were sometimes their own countrymen. The route along the Dnieper to Constantinople, for instance, was notorious for its 7 treacherous waterfalls, where entire ships had to be portaged overland. A vulnerable time indeed, leaving traders exposed to sudden attacks. A quiet continues. Now we've explored the grand tapestry of Viking expansion, the movements across vast seas and winding rivers. but we must remember that these weren't merely journeys of conquest. Indeed, the Vikings were also profound architects of trade, weaving together a complex economic web across medieval Europe. Think of them not just as intrepid warriors, but as the initial threads of a vast commercial interconnection. What's particularly fascinating is how this shift from raiding to trading was often intertwined. You see, the early raids, while driven by a thirst for wealth, also inadvertently scouted out future trade routes and valuable resources. Suddenly, lands once plundered became partners in commerce. It was a gradual evolution, perhaps, but a powerful one nonetheless. Consider their seafaring prowess, which was not solely for battle. Their longships, those iconic vessels, were incredibly versatile. Their shallow draft allowed them to navigate not only the stormy open seas of the North Atlantic, but also to penetrate deep inland via rivers, reaching regions that had previously been isolated. This ability to bridge land and sea was truly revolutionary for the era. These extensive trade networks weren't confined to one direction. Oh no. To the west, the Danish and Norwegian Vikings established vital connections with the British Isles and Western Europe. Centers like Hedeby in Denmark and Koppang in Norway hummed with activity, exchanging furs, amber, and walrus ivory for luxuries like silver and fine textiles from more developed regions. Imagine the hustle and bustle, the clamor of different languages blending. A prelude to modern commerce, but the eastern routes, predominantly forged by the Swedish Vikings, were equally, if not more, extraordinary. These routes led them through the Baltic Sea, up the great rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga, the Dnieper, all the way to the rich markets of Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates. This was the famous route from the Varangians to the Greeks, establishing a lifeline of trade that stretched across continents. It was along these routes that key settlements like Novgorod and Kiev would rise, foundations for a new Russian state. The commodities exchanged were as diverse as the cultures connected. From the cold northern forests came valuable furs, sable, ermine, fox, amber from the Baltic shores, and the precious walrus ivory. In return, from the sophisticated empires of the East flowed exotic silks, aromatic spices like cinnamon and pepper, and vast quantities of silver coinage, particularly the Islamic dirhams, which became a de facto currency across Scandinavia. Perhaps even slaves, tragically, were a significant part of this trade, sold in markets as far-flung as Dublin and Constantinople. It's a sobering thought, but a historical reality of the age. The strategic placement of Viking trade centers or emporia was a stroke of commercial genius. Places like Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in modern-day Germany, and Koppang in Norway became vibrant melting pots. Here, not just goods were exchanged, but ideas, technologies, and even languages. These were the proto-cities of their time, bustling hubs where the rhythms of daily life were set by the arrival and departure of ships, laden with wonders from distant lands. It was in these places, in these moments of interaction, that Europe truly began to awaken and connect on a scale not seen since the Roman Empire. Dreams of discovery. A quiet transformation born of these journeys began to sweep across Europe. The sheer volume of goods, the constant movement of people, and the clash and fusion of cultures, it all started to knit together a tapestry far richer and more complex than what existed before. Indeed, the economic legacy of the Vikings is quite profound. They introduced a sophistication to trade that laid the groundwork for future medieval economies, including the famed Hanseatic League much later. Think of it: standardized weights and measures, the widespread use of silver currency, and the creation of bustling market towns. These weren't just temporary hubs, they were places where people from diverse backgrounds came together, exchanged goods, and perhaps most importantly, exchanged ideas. The Vikings were, in a very real sense, the economic intermediaries of their age, bridging the vast distances of medieval Europe and beyond. They connected the silver mines of the Islamic world with the fur-rich forests of the north, the fine silks of Byzantium with the amber of the Baltic coast. Now this intricate web of trade also fostered the growth of a new social class, the merchant. Imagine a Viking chieftain, no longer just a warrior but a savvy businessman, navigating both treacherous seas and complex negotiations. This shift, it signaled a change in the very fabric of society, leading to increased social mobility and the accumulation of wealth in these burgeoning urban centers. And with wealth came new forms of social stratification, new specialized guilds of craftsmen, and subtle but significant changes in how people lived and even how they buried their dead. The long-term impact of these trading networks cannot be overstated. They didn't just move goods, they moved populations. They spurred the creation of new towns and settlements, places like Dublin and York, or the Norse colonies in Iceland and Greenland, that eventually grew into thriving cities. The Varangians, as the Vikings were known in the East, were instrumental in the formation of Kiev and Rus, the precursor to modern-day Russia and Ukraine. Their influence, therefore, stretched far beyond mere economic transaction. It shaped political landscapes and cultural identities. What's particularly fascinating is how these practices, refined by Viking ingenuity, influenced judicial systems. Some scholars suggest that the Thing assemblies, the Norse communal gatherings for legal and political matters, were early precursors to the parliamentary systems we see today. Imagine the echoes of those ancient gatherings in the halls of modern governance. The idea that people come together to debate, to decide, to establish common laws. It's a subtle but powerful thread connecting us to their world. These vast networks, these tireless journeys, they didn't just end with the Viking Age. They laid the foundations, the deep and enduring channels along which future generations of merchants and explorers would travel. The Hanseatic League, for instance, a powerful medieval trading confederation, would later expand upon many of the roots and practices pioneered by the Norse. It's as if the Vikings charted the initial course and planted the seeds for much of northern Europe's economic destiny. What began with fierce raids evolved, quietly and steadily, into an economy that touched the lives of millions across continents. A subtle, yet profound whisper in the grand tapestry of European history. The lasting whisper. And so our long and winding journey through the quiet transformation wrought by the Vikings draws to a close. We have traversed vast oceans and meandering rivers, explored bustling market towns and serene, untouched lands. What began as a saga of raids and upheaval, you see, evolved into a profound narrative of interconnectedness, a story whispered through the rustling leaves of time, of how distant cultures met, exchanged, and grew. We have seen how these remarkable Norsemen, often remembered primarily for their swift longships and fearsome axes, were in fact equally adept at weaving the intricate tapestry of trade. They were the silent architects of a new economic landscape, linking the distant reaches of Scandinavia with the vibrant markets of the Byzantine Empire and the sophisticated caliphates of the Islamic world. Think of it: furs from the northern forests exchanged for shimmering silks from the Far East, amber from the Baltic shores for precious silver dirhams from distant lands. It was a commerce that laid the very foundations for the bustling medieval Europe that would follow, stimulating growth, forging cities and creating entirely new political landscapes. Their ships, wonders of engineering, were not merely vessels of war but grand carriers of culture and innovation. They brought not just goods but also words that would become part of other languages, ideas that sparked new forms of art, and technologies that advanced the very craft of sailing. From the naming of places to the very flow of our language today, those echoes of the Norse persist, like ancient runes carved into the very memory of our world. This journey has shown us that history, much like the human spirit, is rarely simple. It is a nuanced interplay of discovery and destruction, of conflict and cooperation, of the relentless human drive to explore, to connect, and to comprehend the vast mysteries that lie beyond the known horizon. The Vikings, in their audacious voyages and their quiet settlements, painted a bolder, more colorful picture of a world far larger and more interconnected than anyone could have previously imagined. And in doing so, they left an indelible mark, not just upon the map, but deep within the grand tapestry of human civilization itself. And so, as the twilight deepens, we reach the conclusion of our lesson. I trust this peaceful meandering through the forgotten avenues of Viking influence has brought you a measure of calm and perhaps a fresh perspective on a people often misunderstood. Thank you for joining me on this profound exploration. If these stories have resonated with you, if they have offered a moment of quiet contemplation, then I would be deeply grateful if you would consider a gentle tap upon that subscribe button. And perhaps a kind gesture, a thumbs up for this video. It is indeed a comforting affirmation, and should you wish to continue our quiet studies, there are many more lessons awaiting you within this series and across the channel. Until our next lesson together, sweet dreams.